Hello, everybody, and welcome to SCB Means Business, the podcast where we meet great leaders making a difference in their community. I'm Holly Schroeder, President and CEO of Santa Clarita Valley Economic Development Corporation, and your host today. And I am very pleased to introduce Stacy Chambliss, CEO of Valencia Technologies, who's here with me today to talk about their brand new product and the culmination of many, many years of hard work. Welcome, Stacy. Great to see you.
Yes, great to see you as well, Holly, and thank you for inviting me to the podcast today.
Yeah.
I'm happy to be here.
Happy to have you here. So, Valencia Technologies is a medical device company here in town. We have several medical device companies, and you, I guess, in some ways are, the newest, or at least have the newest product. And so congratulations on the recent approvals and recent first deployment, I guess you would say. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your medical device and sort of what the great news is of late? I'll let you share.
Sure. Thank you, Holly, for the introduction and the opportunity to talk about what it is we're doing here at Valencia Technologies. So we have recently received FDA approval of our neuromodulation device that we call eCoin, short for electroceutical coin. And what does that mean? It's meant to suggest that we've taken typical neuromodulation and made it so small it's more benign, like you might think of a pharmaceutical. So that's sort of the name behind what might sound like cryptocurrency. It's certainly not cryptocurrency. So we're involved in neuromodulation. And what is that? It's something that probably your listeners would be more familiar with pacemaker technology, which is the stimulation. In neuromodulation's case, same basic technology as pacemaker technology. But what we're talking about is the electrical stimulation of a nerve inside the body using a permanent implant. So very exciting area to be in medicine. It's a privilege to be able to be a part of making a product that improves people's lives. In our case, this product took us a very long time to get to this point in FDA approval. It's a Class 3 medical device, which means it has the most scrutiny by the FDA. Involves a lot of work to get through to this point, probably about typical 10 years or more to get to this point with a Class 3 medical device. So we've just crossed that finish line, that initial finish line to really get started with the real work of commercializing this product. That happened on March 1st of this year. So a lot of fun happening over here, and we're just having fun.
So neuromodulation, as you said, it's like using a device to stimulate the nervous system, right? So what in particular, what nerves and what ailments might somebody have that eCoin that you guys have been approved for that it will treat or help people?
Yeah, and in fact, I'm going to get out of the screen for a second while I grab my device right here. So, so our neuromodulation device, many of you may be listening, but what I'm showing here is our coin-sized and shaped, hence eCoin, neuromodulation device that is implanted in the body. In our case, it's in the lower leg to stimulate the tibial nerve. And that nerve in the lower leg actually ultimately modulates bladder control, that bladder function. So what we're doing is we're treating people with what's called urgency urinary incontinence. It means that people have difficulty holding their voiding and have accidents younger in life than they need to be having accidents. And so it's a serious quality of life issue for many people, affecting large groups of adult men and women. As many as, say, a quarter of women, for example, over the age of 40 have overactive bladder, which is a broader definition for a broader condition than just urgency urinary incontinence. but a very prevalent condition, many people suffering from it, many people suffering silently from it. So our device is implanted in the leg in a manageable procedure done under local anesthetic. A person can go into an office setting and certainly leave the same day, maybe taking as much as a Tylenol. So we think of it as something patients can understand, something that perhaps they want, and we're really excited to be able to finally offer it to our patients as well as our physicians for their toolbox.
So what's the origin story of the company? I mean, where did the company start? And I know you were one of the first employees.
Yeah. Thank you for the question, Holly. So the company started back in 2010, where my dad and I shared one desk and worked together looking at various different ideas that folks had brought to him that we had come up with, not all even in medical technology. We were simply determined together to start a business. And so many months later, we landed on something in the area of medical technology. My father, I think, Holly, you're familiar with, but probably not all of your listeners are. His name is Jeff Greiner, and he's the founder and former longtime CEO of Valencia Technologies, but also the longtime operational leader of a neuromodulation company in this valley called Advanced Bionics. That's a company that today makes cochlear implants, but also made spinal cord stimulators and deep brain stimulators that were sold to another local company called Boston Scientific Neuromodulation. And so he has a really deep history in neuromodulation, and he had convinced me just as I was graduating law school to come do something with him, and it may or may not be medical. So I somehow took the plunge, said yes. The two of us got going, and I learned to read a lot. At one point, he had me looking at nerves, try to find nerves to treat hypertension, see what you can find. I think this is going to be an area where there's going to be medical devices. So I did that, and one day I stumbled upon some literature showing that you could stimulate the median nerve in the forearm, and it would improve hypertension, which is a huge problem. My dad took that and read it and goes, oh my gosh, if you can stimulate this with low duty cycle stimulation, not something I fully appreciated at the time, then you can have a tiny device, tiny round device that looks like a nickel or a dime, I think he conceived of it eventually being. And you can get rid of the lead wire that always gives us problems in neuromodulation, that thing that breaks and moves and makes it hard to make the device MRI compatible. And this is really something. We can have a simple procedure. This is really something. So he was the one with a really big aha. I was the one who kind of found the literature because I was doing the slog. I'm the attorney who reads really hard and will find what he's looking for. And so that was the very beginning of us starting Valencia Technologies. And here we are 12 years later, almost 12 years later. We pivoted to another indication, but we're here. We have an actual nickel-sized and shaped, fully implanted neuromodulation device, just as my dad had envisioned.
Wow, it's really amazing, and and it indicates that maybe there's the same device could maybe be used for other, or a similar device could be used for other types of ailments?
Yes, that's a really good question. So we had envisioned from the outset that there was other literature, there were other conditions, other nerves that could be stimulated for short duration periods, and if you could stimulate a nerve for short duration, you can have a tiny battery instead of the big bulky ones that today's neuromodulation devices require. And so we actually spent the early years looking through literature to find those other clinical applications for this basic technology. And that was my primary role very early on. So I'm not a scientist, Holly, but I read details. And so we have actually significant patent protection. I don't know what, maybe 40 plus patents covering our basic technology and also the use of this system to treat various different chronic conditions, from PTSD and depression to high cholesterol and low back pain, various different things that we are interested in pursuing. Today, as it stands, as we just obtained FDA approval, we're really focused on our commercial launch. We've even kind of organized the company so that we would focus really hard on that and then turn to those other things at another time, or maybe by a related group that does it while we focus on overactive bladder. But it's a really good question. This basic technology is certainly applicable to other conditions as well.
So the device goes in the leg, you say, even though it is treating a bladder symptom. So how is it that works? How do you know that works? And and how is it effective relative to maybe somebody having to take medications, or, as you say, maybe just suffering silently because they don't know that some treatments exist?
Yeah, really good question. So the way that it works is kind of like you said, it's all connected. So you're stimulating one nerve in the body, and it is talking to, through its various channels, talking to the brain, the pontine micturition center in the brain, and then the brain then talks to the bladder nerves and says, hey, you're overactive. And somehow it comes back to help modulate that. So that's a really basic way of saying how it is that it works. How does that compare to maybe the way that drugs work or any other treatments for overactive bladder, or what we call UUI, urgency urinary incontinence, which is a subset of overactive bladder? So patients have various options. They can do behavioral therapy, things like fluid intake management, which can only get them so far. And then they can move on to drugs. There are two different classes of medications for overactive bladder. One is called an anticholinergic, and the other one is a beta agonist. And those two, they're maybe 50% effective, maybe for 50% of patients. But the biggest crux is that patients stop using them after a year at really high rates, like 80% of patients don't want to take those drugs anymore. So you can read into it what you will, but the side effects are very significant, and efficacy is generally just so-so. So by and large, there are many patients affected by overactive bladder. Like I said, maybe a quarter of adult women affected by overactive bladder. And yet the drugs are really not doing it for them. And that's the easiest thing to go for first, right? So then patients may move on to what is called the third line, so second line drugs. And then they move on to the third line, maybe get into a specialist office, a urologist, or what's called a urogynecologist. It's a gynecologist who specializes in female pelvic medicine. And so they get into the office of one of those people and they discuss the third line. And there are three different options available today before eCoin. Something called Botox, may sound familiar. Something called percutaneous tibial nerve stimulation, which is actually what we derive the eCoin device from, much of that literature and that clinical work. And then there's a typical neuromodulation product called sacral neuromodulation. So there are some options available, invasive or pragmatically difficult options available already. And the way that we see eCoin, and that's us today, is that it's the best of those options, that patients are going to prefer it before they want to go get Botox, which is something that is repeated and it's painful and it's immodest, or before they go get sacral neuromodulation, which is much more invasive, just objectively much more invasive, two-stage procedure done under general anesthesia. They may want to try that other option, that PTNS option, but pragmatics are very difficult. It involves patients going into the office weekly, basically forever, and it can be a difficult thing to accomplish and perhaps not as efficacious. So those are sort of the options available to patients today.
So with the eCoin, so it goes in the leg, and then, how long does it last, and how does it keep working?
Yeah, actually a really educated question, Holly, because this is a device with a battery, and it has a term of life. It has a service life. So this device that we have just launched with in the market will last for 3 years. You can think of it just like a pacemaker, how pacemakers are replaced. It will last for 3 years, and then it will need to be replaced with a new device, likely in the same exact spot that it was placed initially, and a similar procedure.
Wow, that's amazing. So, and you said you could do it in an office setting. So even if you have, 3 years, one, that's a long time, and then two, it's a pretty simple procedure, it sounds like. The thing that, you showed it's like the size of maybe like a quarter or even smaller, it looks like.
Yeah, that's right. It's about a nickel in diameter, but a little bit thicker than a nickel. Placed in the lower leg, done well, performed well in the office. Patients appear comfortable. They appear really satisfied with the procedure itself, reporting that they, 97%, I think, of our patients at the year point said, yes, I understood what I was getting into. I understood the procedure that was explained to me. That's really high, I think, for patients, and suggests kind of a level of satisfaction and understanding of what is going on. I've personally seen the procedure many times, maybe a dozen or so times. We've been a tiny company, so it enables us to have the opportunity to go get really involved and see it and talk to patients and find out what it's really like, not just what it sounds like.
So you've just got the approval from FDA a couple months ago, and you've just started doing sort of the commercialization with doctors. So, tell me a little bit about the process to get it approved. Obviously, you had clinical trials here, and that's where you gained a lot of this feedback that you're describing. Mm-hmm. That's a really long process with the FDA. What are they looking for, and how do you navigate that? And is this in the U.S. or everywhere? Tell me more.
So, yes, this is called a PMA device. So it suggests that like I said, the highest level of scrutiny is involved for a Class 3 medical device. So we did clinical trials. We did a feasibility study in the U.S. and also New Zealand in high 40 number of patients, 46, 48 patients. And then we did a pivotal study as well, looking at 133 patients throughout the U.S. at 15 different sites in the U.S. Both of these had fairly long follow-up for neuromodulation. Devices are treated a little bit differently than drugs that need higher power. They need larger numbers in order to figure out what kinds of systemic effects might appear. The same is not true of devices. We sort of understand more what's happening in a short term typically, and in smaller patient numbers. So we completed clinical work. It was very favorable, perhaps more favorable than we anticipated. It's not comparative data compared to those other options, but we believe that it may be more efficacious than those other options that I mentioned before. So really good data that we were able to find. And then the PMA process itself is not just clinical data. It's a lot more. It involves a very significant review at all of the safety testing that's been done on the device, and demands as well from FDA about what it is that they want to see. So it takes a fair amount of experience to put together the right PMA application to have anticipated all the testing. Where you inevitably will error is somewhere in there. And those questions that FDA asks can cause delays. They can mean you have to go do additional biocompatibility testing that's going to take 12 weeks or something like that. So it's very involved. I think our application, the original application before even having the back and forth, was maybe 3,000 at least pages, I think, of information, primarily that bench testing, as well as all of the clinical data as well. Yeah.
Wow, amazing. And then, of course, as you now start, having patients do this, I'm assuming there's more follow-up.
Yes.
So how do you reach patients now, and how do doctors learn how to do the procedure, and how does this move from the research phase to the approval to the to the commercialization and utilization phase?
Yeah, great question. So in our case, we think there are so many patients in the offices already of specialists, of urologists and urogynecologists, that we are prioritizing finding the right physicians and training them, and we'll start with their pool of existing patients, as opposed to trying to kind of educate nationwide on what it is that we're doing. So a little bit quieter, I suppose, on the marketing end for that reason. And we have really high demand from the right kinds of physicians to be doing this. Our strategy is to try to think long-term about what it is we want to be seeing from this technology. We want the best possible outcomes for our patients. And often that means trying to focus on your training of physicians, and even your selection of physicians who are going to see this kind of population. So they get practice. They get a lot of practice at selecting patients who are going to do well at performing the procedure, which is something they can learn, certainly, but at performing that. So we've put a lot of effort into that selection process. We are also putting a lot of effort into the training program. We have a medical doctor leading our training program, Dr. Alexandra Rogers. She was actually the leading implanter in our pivotal study, and I was able to convince her to come focus on us for a couple of years and help us with having a really high quality launch, help us select the right physicians and train them. It's a really robust training program involving independent study, meant to be a barrier to entry as much as teaching, independent study, a anatomy lab, a nice name for a cadaver lab, where you actually have to demonstrate individually that you can competently perform the procedure. And then they move on to doing cases, and they need to have a sufficient number of cases proctored by another physician before we sort of let them go on their own. And so it's a pretty robust setup, and we think it's going to pay dividends, and that's kind of the point of it. So ultimately, we want patients to do really well, just like we saw in our clinical trials.
Yeah, so it's interesting. It's really a scale-up process from that research phase into this, but it sounds like you're taking it in very strategic incremental steps, not sort of trying to be everything to everyone all at once, right?
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
So what's that been like as a company to move from that research phase towards the scale up and rollout phase?
Yeah, it's a whirlwind, I would say. In January 2021, I think we had 15 full-time employees. And today, June 13th, 2022, we have, I think it's 101 full-time employees. So we've done a lot of growing. A lot of that was in anticipation of FDA approval, knowing that it was coming. Probably a large amount of that was in operations. We actually manufacture our devices here in Valencia. And so we've been doing a lot of growing. It's a big change for some of us who have been here for many years, kind of wearing lots of hats and needing to be more focused, maybe even be more narrow in some respects. We're still a tiny company, so you still wear hats. But it's been really exciting. We've been able to, despite a really strange environment with the pandemic, we've managed to recruit wonderful talent from Santa Clarita in particular, people who would be our top choices for various roles. And a lot of that is some good luck. You get one great person and so knows that they're someone they look up to, came to Valencia Technologies, and they're a little less nervous, say it's prior to approval, and they're really excited. And so we've just been really able to grow the organization with people who are really talented and also kind of have the appetite to be a part of something that's pretty early still.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you're creating the whole manufacturing process in addition to obviously a sales and training process. What is the, what type of people are you looking for kind of in those categories? I mean, what is the manufacturing process? What does that look like?
Yeah. So you heard me already say we had huge growth in the last year. We'll continue to grow, slightly lower rate. And the kinds of roles that we are hiring for are varied. So they kind of spread throughout the organization depending on the need. We have primarily filled our manufacturing organization. Not, that won't be it because we're still growing a lot, and we hope to have the kinds of volumes that will push us to keep growing in that group as well. But that was the large focus of the previous year. So as far as what it takes to build a class 3 medical device, it takes a lot. So that's where we were focusing most of our efforts last year here in Valencia, hiring people, training assemblers to learn a really high skill, many of them already very experienced in building medical devices, class 3 medical devices, but training them to our process and making it the kind of thing that is really repeatable without human error, and yet you have true experts that are needed in the process. This is not done by machines. This is done by highly skilled labor. So it's very involved, many steps to make this tiny little medical device, and many steps to even validate the process and make sure that what we're doing is going to repeat itself every time that we do it. Yeah. Oh,
fantastic. I mean, it's just so exciting to see, the work that has been going on for so many years, and to basically have a new medical device production coming here into the Santa Clarita Valley, and you've named the company Valencia Technologies, Valencia being a community within the Santa Clarita Valley. So what was the driver of that? I mean, that goes back many years now, the choice of your company name, and is it going to stay keep the same company name?
Yes. So we named the company Valencia Technologies to honor the people of Valencia, or of Santa Clarita, where the human talent comes from that makes up this company. It took a lot of skill, but also resilience to make this company what it is. And our name was meant to honor those people. And like you heard me say, we're pulling from great talent locally from here in Santa Clarita, from the various medical device companies, and from Advanced Bionics and Boston Scientific, where our founder comes from as well. So it's an important name to us. I really like it. I really like how it kind of exemplifies our true values and how important our people are to this organization.
Well, I sure love it, and so impressed and happy for you with the wonderful success that you've had, and getting the approval and starting to really roll out this wonderful new product that, as you said, is going to, I think, help a lot of people who don't know that there are these types of solutions available to them. So Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much, Holly. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for listening. And this is SCV Means Business. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we will see you next time. Have a great day.